Hi, everyone. I'm really excited today to be talking with Anthony on the subject of MBAs and specifically the pros and cons and whether or not to choose to do an MBA. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the co-founder of MoveMeOn.com. It's a free platform for people to explore opportunities and get great career guidance, particularly for moving in and out of professional services. So, for example, around 100,000 consultants globally use our platform. If you don't know the platform, it's free. Go check it out, movemeon.com. Anthony, I'm going to let you introduce yourself before we get into the topic of whether or not to do an MBA.
Great, thanks, Rich. Rich and I know each other as having been consultants together. I now work as an independent consultant and sort of wannabe entrepreneur. In between that, I've been part of the leadership team of a national social enterprise. I've been a policymaker. I've done more consulting, and I've been a teacher way back as well. And I think importantly to this conversation, I did my MBA at INSEAD about 10 years ago now.
Cool. And we will get straight in, I guess, on the MBA stuff. So I guess the wider context is, the world has evolved, learning has evolved, edtech has moved forward, and the kind of thought of today is really how relevant is an MBA, who would get a lot from it, who won't get a lot from it. So we're going to do this like chronologically, start with kind of like pre-application. If you're thinking about an MBA, we're going to go right through that. If you're doing one, how to get the most out of an MBA, and then we're going to wrap up with a bit of a pros and cons and summary. So I guess, Anthony, if you cast your mind back down over to like before you applied or when an MBA was first mentioned to you, like what should people be thinking about? Like, why should they go and do an MBA? Why might they not want to do an MBA? How do they make that choice to apply, basically?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. I think there's three things I would have in my mind. I think one is, what do you want to get out of it? The second is the type of learning and experience that you will get as an MBA, a situation in which you're going to thrive more than learning in another way, or more than sort of learning through being in the workplace. And then I think the last of those is it the right time for you? Too early, too late? What other opportunities do you have? And I think it's very person dependent on all of those three.
And as you think about, I guess, which school, length of program, there's a huge range in fees. Some people might have sponsorship from their company. Others will be taking loans and paying. How did you think through that process and make a choice? Obviously, you went to INSEAD, but I'm sure there were lots of other business schools out there.
Yeah, I mean, I think the fees are a big one, and it's worth thinking about that up front and the time you're going to spend doing it. So those two things, there's a sort of opportunity cost, and there's just genuine financial cost there. But aside from that, I think there's a lot of nuance there, and I think a lot of people spend time looking at what is the latest FT rankings of MBA schools or whoever else does these rankings. I wouldn't worry too much about that. I do think, if you've got a sense of I could be in the top 10 schools or the next 10 schools, it's worth looking at a bracket of 10 schools, and then you'll have a sense of what's the choice you have in that area. And then it's really the micro differences between culture and what they're good at and where they are that I think are more important than exactly where in a ranking table they have. So I think some of those factors, geography plays a big part. I think, naturally, if you go to you want to think about where your network's going to be and where your opportunities are going to be. If you do a US school, you will have more opportunities in the US, more network in the US, although those big schools have great cachet everywhere around the world. Also, if you look at some of the European schools, you may have a much wider network across Europe, Asia, possibly less so in North America. But you're probably sort of putting yourself a little bit into those markets and industry as well. INSEAD was known as a consulting school, LBS was known certainly as a more of a finance school. Brexit, I think I was having a conversation yesterday. Brexit is adjusting things a little bit for how LBS thinks of itself, for example. I believe so. Those things are important. Also, the culture of the place, and here is where I'd really encourage people to find some recent graduates and
Right.
talk to them about the experience. The big choosing point for me in going to INSEAD was I spoke to a range of people who'd gone through INSEAD, and when I talked to them about the experience, I liked what I heard. I'd also liked working with them as people. And so that was a big piece for me. For others, it might be that you feel that you will thrive more in, say, a Harvard environment or Cambridge Business School. Others. So I think those are really big things to consider. What I
And would
left
course
out.
length be another one? I know some business schools are 1 year, like, or 12 full months. Other business schools have moved to 15 months. The US schools are much more geared towards a 2 year program. Do you think it matters?
Yeah, I think, there's the practicality of how much time you want to spend doing it, and family considerations can play a big part there as well. I think the benefits of the longer courses, you do have more time to do things like internships, to explore things and to develop your network, develop friendships over that period. 10 months, which INSEAD was, it is an intense experience. There are benefits to that, but you have to probably accept in those shorter experiences there's going to be trade-offs that you make in terms of prioritizing knowledge and learning, prioritizing network and social, prioritizing the time you have for job search afterwards.
Awesome. And before we're going to close the chat with kind of an overall pros and cons and who might want to do an MBA and why. But given that you kind of been through that MBA experience, I want to talk a little bit about like how to get the most out of your time there, right? So, what would you be thinking about in terms of maybe career development, in terms of network development, possibly social things? How do people, once they've opted in and maybe accepted an offer, how do people make sure they get the most out of that time and all those fees they're paying?
Yeah, I mean, I think on the network side and the knowledge side, I think what's great about MBA programs, they're probably the first time people in their career, for many people in their careers, that they have a chance to reflect about their career journey and what they've learned to date with a number of people who've taken slightly different paths. And I think on the knowledge side, a lot of people coming in from consultancy are a little bit, do I learn anything new? There's a sort of sense of like, it's quite shallow learning. But I think actually the knowledge bit is great in MBAs. You get a real chance to spend time talking about things with people who've experienced them slightly differently. And you get a chance to really broaden beyond what you might have experienced as a consultant, for example, take courses in things you've never heard of. On the network side, I think it's really useful just go in with an open mind. One of the things I've taken away from it 10 years on is that I have a different network of MBA friends, sort of predominantly in London now, than the people I mainly spent most of my time with during that year. And there's an overlap, of course, but it's really interesting how people pop back in and out of your life after the program, and how relationships form both on a friendship level, but also in terms of working together, in a business side beyond.
So it's interesting that your network has kind of continued to develop post MBA and not necessarily, the people that you spent most time with or really connected with there. So there must be a sense of alumni ship or, kind of commitment to the school.
Yeah, I think so. And I think that's another reason, going back in the choice to that geography question, it can be, you don't have to have this, but it's certainly a wonderful thing if you end up in a city with a bunch of alumni, a bunch of classmates who you've been through that program with.
And would you say it's fair to say that if we look at the US and we look at the non-US schools, I would say, my point of view would be the US schools have strong brands globally. However, if you're in the US, the US schools tends to have stronger brands. Do you have a different experience? So, if I'm sat in New York or California thinking about an MBA, should I be thinking about London Business School, INSEAD, or am I better to kind of stick with the US big hitters?
I think if you're going back to look, I know a lot of I know classmates have gone back to North America. Actually, interestingly, we have more Canadians than US and been fantastically successful and built fantastic network and careers there. But I think they would acknowledge that they have slightly stepped out of the normal expected MBA path doing
Right.
that. There aren't, it's a small community in San Francisco or New York of INSEADers, for example. So it's a choice that those people I think have made to expand their understanding of the business world. But I think most of them would say, yeah, it came at a little cost somewhere along the way as well.
That's really helpful. So I guess as an overall like summary section, if somebody sat there going, should I do one? What are the overall pros and cons? How would you kind of summarize the pros and like who should go do one?
Yeah. Pros, I think if you want to build and you have that energy to build a network of and learn in an environment where you're going to be pushed, and I really push, don't just not just like-minded people, but people who will challenge you. I think it is a great time to spend. If you feel you're at a point where you want to reflect on what you've achieved so far, think about what could be ahead. Great there as well. And I also think, there's an element of MBAs that are a bit like porridge in that you kind of eat them in the morning. It's energy that kind of gives out through the day. And I do think something I've learned over time, the energy of the MBA, the positivity, the connections give out across your career. And it's more evident to me. Cons, we talked about this initially on a thread about starting a business. There are people I know who have started and run and sold fantastically successful businesses from my class. But if you are someone who operates best just getting your hands dirty and you already know what you want to build and you already have some local connections to make that work, you don't need to do an MBA to take that path. It may help you somewhere along the way, but you definitely don't need it, and you might get frustrated by it.
Yeah, I would certainly kind of maybe add to that if you don't have the idea yet, but your kind of, entrepreneurial DNA is there, do consider joining a smaller business or a young business or a newer business or even a growth kind of Series B, Series C, soaking up that learning from working hand in hand with people and then applying that knowledge. And I guess obviously the fee size is pretty astronomical, right? So we're talking hundreds of thousands of euros or dollars or pounds or wherever you are in the world. How do you kind of think that stacks up? There's obviously a lot more free learning nowadays than maybe when you did your MBA and digital courses, online courses. I think you said that Fred, $50,000 goes a long way in terms of coaching and courses. So is it a case of it's worth the money?
I think there is, I think for most people there is a payoff there, but it really depends what you want to do with it as well. It's definitely true that inflation, in at least at the top end of the MBA market, has been substantial over the last 10 years, and the cost of picking up the knowledge has dropped considerably, and the cost of getting some of the practical knowledge has dropped considerably. I would certainly, therefore, encourage anyone thinking of MBA to really almost be thinking, what's my business case for this in my career? And are there things that I can, value engineer a little bit and do in a different way? And if after that there are certainly not quite intangibles, but the effect of that network over time, or the desire that you want to put that investment in for a year or two and have that sort of reflection up front, if it's still there, then absolutely, it may well be the right path for you. But there are more and more alternatives if you're not quite sure.
And something just to, I guess, summarize that I've picked up in our conversation today is the word reflection.
Mm-hmm.
Would it be fair to say if somebody sat there with a really pretty firm view on where they want to take their career, then an MBA is possibly a bit less relevant, or they might have a lower ROI than someone who maybe isn't quite sure and wants to expand their network and expand their horizons and kind of use that MBA period to help them plot their path forward?
Yeah, I think you'd just be thinking about it very differently. Some people go into that MBA saying it's a bit of a potpourri. I'm going to take a bit from here, take a bit from there, meet everyone. I think an attitude you can take, and I've seen people take to the MBA, is they're pretty sure what they want to do, or roughly. Like, okay, I know what courses I'm going to offer. I know what courses I'm going to do. I know, which networks I want to be part of, which trips I want to be part of, and I'm going to make sure that I wring everything out of it. So there is that path you can take through, and it may well still have an ROI for you, but equally, I wouldn't criticize anyone who said, actually, I don't need this. I know what I'm going to do, and I know how I'm going to pick this stuff up elsewhere. The other thing I guess we haven't mentioned so much in this is having that path laid out, but knowing you need somehow to pivot or open some doors to get there, and that's maybe where an MBA is more powerful than than if you know that promotion is there or that opportunity is already there within your own network.
Yeah, pivoting, transitioning, kind of legitimizing a lateral move is definitely something I hear a lot. And I guess very lastly on the fees, I know that a lot of companies offer sponsorship, and conversely, a lot of companies will hire out of MBAs promising to pay off your loan. Am I right in thinking there's a tie in there? So this is not free money. It tends to be tied into a number of years of service. Is that right?
Yeah, that's normally the case. I think consultancies often, at least when I did it, was 2 years of service. Afterwards, it's the financing of it is, unless you're very fortunate, you're either taking out a big loan, and that of course has ties as well in terms of what you can do in your career. And if you want to go into the social enterprise space, as I did, some of those choices, or if you want to become an entrepreneur, some of those choices become a bit more challenging with that loan, if you have that loan there. But yeah, in other places it really is a tie-in, and so you have to be comfortable with what your options are likely to be after you come out,
and
as
going
well.
in with eyes open that if you're doing a 2-year course that's sponsored by, let's say, your consulting firm, that's actually more like a 4-year commitment.
Yes.
Once you go back and kind of pay it down.
Yeah, exactly.
Look, Anthony, thanks so much. I think this has been super helpful for me. I didn't do an MBA. I went off to be an entrepreneur. It's a question I get asked all the time from Move Me On users. So I really appreciate you sharing your insights.
Great. Thank you very much, Rich. Pleasure.
No worries. And if people are interested in topics like this, if you're a current or a former consultant, you can subscribe to the channel here. You can check me out on LinkedIn. So go to Richard Rosser. And if you're not a Move Me On user, it's a free platform. Just head over to movemeon.com. Cheers, Anthony. Have a good evening.
Great. Thank you.